Excellent. So we went ahead and did a stack. So if your name, you got a hold of me, go ahead and line up. And yeah, if you'd like to go ahead and start.
Hi, my name is Ksenia, and I would like to thank you for being here today. I had a couple of weeks ago, I read an interview with David Brown. He interviewed you, and I have a question about your DMT research. I had a hard time pinpointing the hypothesis that you tried to deny or kind of prove with the DMT research that you did. What was the question behind it that you were trying to answer?
Yeah. So when you write a grant, you need to present specific aims. Yeah. And my work, I started working on that grant in 1988. That was the first grant I submitted. And those three specific aims were to prove you could give DMT safely. So that was a hypothesis. Either you could or you couldn't, and I was, hoping I could. I was expecting I could.
Yeah.
Well, the other was, that I could, that it would be able to, generate good data, and those specific data were to confirm was to confirm all of the preceding 25 years, worth of animal pharmacology. In other words, that you were, conceiving of these, drugs as activating serotonin receptors in lower animals and in humans. I was interested in either confirming or refuting, that the, discoveries in, lower animals, since all of the news about, serotonin, had been coming out for those last 20 years, was also the case in humans. So, we looked at a slew of biological variables which were, theoretically under the control of, serotonin systems. Like a large number of, neuroendocrine parameters, beta endorphin, cortisol, growth hormone, all those. Plus, psychological responses. I was interested in, developing a rating scale, which could, quantify the DMT effect. So that was another one of the goals or specific aims, was to be able to develop a scale that was, sensitive, to dose response effects. So it was a, dose response study, like a, phase 1 study. What happens when you give a little bit? What happens when you give a medium bit? What happens when you give a lot? So the studies after that, built on those normative data. We attempted to develop tolerance to closely spaced injections of DMT. Because the classic, drugs, if you take them every day, you stop responding. And, that hadn't been established, with DMT either in humans or in animals. So, that was another study that we did.
And do you think overall people had a positive experience with DMT, positive psychological experience with DMT?
Yeah, the vast majority. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, there were adverse effects even in our really carefully screened, prepared, supervised, followed up folks, but they were transient. But still, it's a pretty, shocking experience. So, it can take some adjusting to.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Awesome. I just quickly want to mention those of you in line, if you could, maybe take a knee for the people behind you or something that might. But yeah, thank you.
Rick, thanks for coming here to Boulder. I'm an integrated medicine physician down in Denver and have been studying shamanism for years now and have had amazing experiences for many of my patients that need healing work down in Peru and have seen them come back as recovered alcoholics, treatment for depression, anxiety disorders. I do believe that there's a huge opportunity for treating some of our mental health issues through the deeper work in psychedelics, ayahuasca, psilocybin, etc. But my question actually is in regards to the effects of DMT on the pineal gland, the third eye, and other elements in terms of how it connects us to the fractal geometry, the sacred geometry of the universe. Is that a spiritual connection we're feeling? Is it an activation of the visual cortex? Is it something that we can only contemplate? What are your deep thoughts on that, and where is it taking us? I'm sure everybody in this room is wondering the same thing, too.
Is that true? Well, I think you could look at DMT as what a Kabbalist once kind of surmised or speculated. You can think of DMT as something which is the most spiritual of the physical and the most physical of the spiritual. It's just at the border. It's kind of a liminal entity. Like a liminal phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to think about its purpose in being in the human being and in all these plants. So I think from the perspective of the spiritual approach, if you're going to be looking at it from that direction, it was placed in us in order for us to communicate with spiritual verities. And at the biological level, it was placed in us or developed evolutionarily to help maintain perceptual homeostasis. Well, the interesting thing about our study is we looked at a slew of hormones, including melatonin, and melatonin was the only hormone that didn't budge, even after a big dose of DMT. So I was both kind of bummed because I spent all that time speculating about the effect of DMT in the pineal, but I kind of gained a new appreciation of the solidity of the pineal, what it takes to move it. So does that kind of approach an answer?
Yeah, it gives me some insight there. My other quick question is, I feel that by working with this plant and others that I have a deeper connectedness to music like Kimba's, mantra music, obviously the geometry and whatnot. Do you feel that the medicine is actually rewiring our brains in a sense, or connecting those nodes that are maybe activated deeper from our primal self and our deeper brain structures?
Well, quite a few people email me and they say, "Oh, this happens to me without DMT." Like I meditate, or I'm kind of in that twilight state between sleep and wakefulness, or I was in a car accident, these kinds of things.
NDEs and all that.
Yeah, so I kind of have a stock answer in saying, to the extent a non-drug state resembles a state brought on by giving DMT, there must be some underlying, commonalities. Mm-hmm. Like either DMT is released in response to music or stress or meditation or sleep states. Or else, DMT is activating, some, downstream, phenomena, which these other things are also activating. Mm-hmm. It's interesting about DMT. It's been around forever in, the evolutionary tree. It occurs in sponges, so it's a really quite an archaic compound. So it's, got to have some, fundamental, role in life and consciousness in life.
Interesting.
You can let's see. Oh, and I think also too the concept of a flashback. If you can maybe expand that and kind of depathologize it. But if you've used DMT or used ayahuasca, and you've got certain experiences that you've had, and then you listen to music which might cause the same kind of feelings, like for example some lightness in your body, let's say. Mm-hmm. Your brain, I think, automatically goes to the previous experience of lightness in your body, and other like associated phenomena kind of pile on as a result of that, kind of kindling, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Activation of the energy body, then
mm-hmm.
having a neuroendocrine effect there.
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah,
great,
something like that.
Good. Thanks for your insights. Appreciate you being here.
Hi, Rick.
Hi.
Nice to see you again. First, a bit of obligatory praise because Dennis said I had to start this way.
Okay.
Sitting in a hot tub with Dennis McKenna He said, yeah, Rick will enjoy that intro. You were being praised. We were in the beginning about 2 years ago in starting Dennis's Dream Lab, Entheobotany Lab, Ideas Lab, Experiential Lab. And we were examining this aspect which we inherit, sort of the kind of a shadow inheritance from Judeo-Christianity, this feeling like if I really am who I am and I come forward to serve or love, then I'll end up on a cross or what have you. And we were each doing our little bit of releasing that kind of tension, and we started to praise different people who we felt were exemplars for just coming out or being deputized to come out and sort of open the way. And so, I've seen tonight that you can bear a certain amount of praise, so we just wanted to acknowledge that you were one of the names that came up, and your work was really seminal in giving us the permission to all own a shared dream and supporting Dennis to realize this company that he's starting. So there was that.
Oh, great, good. That's
definitely.
nice to hear. Yeah.
And then at the same time, interesting how things recombine. I was praising Daniel for what he's doing here and how it's grown with this beautiful community and family here. So just a chance to kind of get to it once. So.
Yeah, there's never too much praise.
So then the self-serving question. I was at the university when you did your last talk. I loved this direction you're going and the new book, just in terms of for itself and everything that it suggested as ideas and a re-examination in my own case of Christianity and Judaism and all that. But I also then took it as permission to reflect on sort of in the traditional sense my prior to entheogenic experimentation and that being owned as part of my spirituality, my closest connection was sort of non-dual traditions, and how I was seeing similar parallels in what DMT had been giving me in terms of takeaway lessons and what the lineages were sharing. And so I just thought I'd ask you a little bit about that by identifying one insight and asking whether it's shared. And you might even indulge a little bit, given the beautiful book you wrote, about looking at it from Old Testament or Judaism or what have you. But it's simply this. I think one of the great gifts that psychedelics give us, or that they've given me, is really a love affair with baseline consciousness. When you don't have anything to compare it to, you just want to break free of it because it's also where all of your unconditional, or your conditioning and your unconsciousness and your survival ego is nested. But then you get this other experience and you can come back and you're, oh, this is beautiful. Actually it's great that not the walls aren't climbing and, there's not a peacock coming out of my brother's head. And, so this love affair with coming back, but the gift, to be freed of the illusion of familiarity with everything, that everything is just its name and this material collapse. So anyway, I feel like I want to acknowledge DMT and those who championed it, because that's a huge gift of freedom.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah, well, do you have a question?
Yeah, so
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
I apologize. But,
yeah.
So on a practical level, it seems that the opportunity to enter into these domains that DMT makes possible gives us a reference point that is really practically serving when we come back to conventional baseline. That may take the form of just the ability to live our daily life in more wonder. But in your case, in the case of Psychedelic Shine, in the case of this new company we're creating, there seems to be almost like the plants are deputizing us to actually serve the gifts that they bring, to get practical, to dare.
What's the question?
Okay, I kind of get what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it kind of reminds me of the conversation we had on the drive in from the airport yesterday. And I was, talking about, one of the folks asked about integration and, the orientation that happens after a big DMT experience. And I think it acts as an attractor. It kind of, pulls you, for the rest of your life to, whatever. But it could be research, it could be art, it could be relationships, it could be Buddhism, it could be something, but I think it establishes itself, or that experience, or the presence of that state or those worlds, serve as an attractor. From here on out, you're kind of marked in a way. The DMT volunteers would complain, kind of half-heartedly or half-jokingly, well, I'm marked now, right? And I'd say, yeah, and it's a big responsibility because you can't deny it, that's happened to you. So you need to, kind of live the rest of your life being under the influence of that, even in your everyday life.
Seems true. Thank you.
Yeah, thank David. Thanks. Just a reminder, afterwards we are having an after party, so we'll have plenty of time for praise and thank yous and everything. So just to keep the questions, I want to make sure we can get as many questions answered as we can. So please go ahead.
So thank you for what you've shared on the content, medically, chemically, scientifically, of these compounds and experiences. My question is more broadly in relation to the context of these experiences and the spaces that we create, whether ceremonially or through community, to facilitate greater transformation with these experiences, because they seem to be so personal, but there's such a dimension of profoundness, from my experience, added to it through intentional ceremony and community and coming together, people's shared consciousnesses around that experience. So personally, or from your own research, do you feel that the traditions of how these substances have been ingested are still, vital to our experience of them now? Do you feel that new traditions that are more, modern to our culture have space to be created? And just overall, the role of community in these psychedelic experiences?
The best, context, or like all the contexts to take these substances, I don't think has really been worked out because there hasn't been much opportunity for, public discourse. Most of, the use is underground, or you go to Peru, and it's a specific, set of circumstances there. Most people who use these within a religious setting, it's mindfulness, like medicinal mindfulness. That's a Buddhist technique, right? As opposed to medicinal prayer, which could also be a possible option. So I think we need to kind of think about wresting things from the Eastern tradition and the New Age tradition to see if there's some way to combine our own Western tradition with these states. These ayahuasca churches from Brazil are starting to do that, the UDV and the Santo Daime, but they're Brazilian, spiritistic, and they pray to their founder, and it still isn't quite a pure culture of combining a Western religious tradition with the states these drugs can occasion. Other people might not have any interest in the spiritual properties and might just want to use them for therapy or for creativity. And the circles here are a good example of maybe leaning towards the more therapeutic aspect. There's some research happening right now in London where they're giving LSD to scientists that have got a stumbling block, and they want to work through their creativity and with LSD. I think ultimately it may turn to that there are specialized centers where people can use these substances, that they're trained, educated to what to expect and what their intention would be, certified administrators of the substances, for various for various purposes, for therapy, for spirituality, for creativity, for more for fun. A number of years ago there was a book which was published by Jonathan Ott, and he speaks about the ludibund use of these drugs, which is purely for pleasure. Because most people dilute their pleasure with all other kinds of things, and Jonathan was keen on the concept of these are purely pleasurable experiences. They don't have a use other than just the experience itself. So I think we're at the infancy of working out the proper contexts for whatever intention people might bring to bear.
And in his, Jonathan said that these experiences were strictly for fun. Was that just a completely recreational use? Was there any dogma or tradition associated with their use, or was it just whatever was right at the moment?
Yeah, it was individual use, or a group use too. But let's see, any doctrine. I suppose Epicureanism, if anything. Like you live for the most possible, the greatest possible appreciation of the moment, from the aesthetic point of view.
Thank you.
Yeah. So read up on Epicurus.
Thank you.
And trip while you're reading him.
Just real quickly, in the interest of affirming feminism, could we have some of the ladies step up in line, please? Go ahead. Come on up. We'll take your question and then we'll move on to these.
Sure.
Thank you.
Cool. Hey, Dr. Strassman, this is a pleasure. Quick question. From my research on DMT, it has a short half-life. And is it based off the chemical or structural? And I'm asking this because I do work with the crystalline of the fascia, which encapsulates all the muscles, tendons, ligaments, organs, everything. But I work on it on the pathways of the Chinese nerve meridians, which run through different muscle groups. And I know with different people, someone could be a smoker for 30 or 40 years and have better health in their lungs than someone who's been a skateboarder who's damaged themselves. And so the guy does a test and he's like, oh, wow, your lungs, you smoke a pack of cigarettes? He's like, I don't smoke cigarettes at all. So my question is, does that affect the half-life also, the structural impingement?
Well, the metabolism of DMT is pretty well worked out. It's broken down by an enzyme called monoamine oxidase.
Okay.
Yeah, it occurs mostly in the liver and the blood.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's one of the pros and cons of smoked or injected DMT is it's short half-life. Like if it's terrible, it's only terrible for a few minutes.
Right. Right.
And if it's great, it's it's only great for a few minutes. Yeah, but that's the metabolism.
Okay.
Well, I've got a colleague, a British colleague who works and lives in Japan, so we just submitted a paper on a model for a continuous infusion of DMT.
Okay.
So
that's what I'm talking about.
You can turn it down, or you could turn it up, and spend as much time there as you want, and you could interact with the beings, and you can get to know the space a lot more than is possible with just smoked or injected.
Right.
Yeah, somebody was wondering, well, isn't that like ayahuasca? But you really can't control the dose of DMT with ayahuasca moment to moment. And also, there's the beta carbolines in ayahuasca, which are not free of psychological effects. So it's not really a pure DMT experience either.
Can you talk about that a little bit too, the beta carbolines? A little bit.
What about them?
I guess why it causes that psychological experience, what that's stimulating and why that might happen, or.
Well, the beta carbolines are inhibitors of that enzyme, which breaks down DMT if it's taken orally. Yeah, so it provides for an orally active DMT experience. Okay. And it's questionable if beta carbolines have got acute psychological properties of their own or not. Most people think they do, but they're kind of subtle.
Okay, well, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you so much.
Hello.
Hi.
While reading about DMT experiences, I came across an account of two friends. One was born blind without eyes and had never tried DMT. The other was sight-abled and had tried DMT. And he administered DMT to his blind friend who had an experience and then asked his sight-abled friend if what he was experiencing was vision, which neither of them knew how to answer.
Right.
Do you have any idea what the blind individual in this instance might be experiencing and what it could mean for the medicalization of DMT or medical utilization of DMT?
Oh, you mean like giving sight to the blind?
Maybe.
That sounds messianic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't know. That's a question I get posed every few months. What happens if you give DMT to blind people?
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a good area for research.
Yeah, especially the fact that this individual didn't have eyes at all.
Right. If there is absolutely no, input.
Right.
No light input.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that would be a really great study.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
and it wouldn't be that hard a study. You can give DMT.
Absolutely.
Now. Yeah. So you can recruit people. Like the National Institute of the Blind would, might be interested
Absolutely.
in, something like that, or some division of NIH. Yeah. But my stock answer to people who ask, well, what happens if you give DMT to a blind person is, I just don't know.
Still a mystery.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
I'm particularly interested in something you touched in the spirit molecule that deals with the 49 days between death and basically when the DMT releases, 49 days with the embryo and everything like that. If you had, I know you talked about switching from Buddhism, which is a Buddhist belief, the 49 days of reincarnation, and back to your Jewish roots, if you had experienced more things that you noticed with numbers and multiples of 7, particularly the divine number of 7, and that being a multiple of 49 and everything.
Right, yeah. I kind of, regretted that thing in the Spirit Molecule book about, 49 days because people thought I'd really lost it. But, I mean, it was a very interesting discovery. Like I was, taking my embryology course as a medical student, and I looking, through Pineal, the index. The first thing I, look at in the embryology book is the index. Is there anything in the pineal? And it's the first indication of its presence in the human fetus is at 49 days. And up until then, I had been interested in the whole idea of reincarnation and the Tibetan, concept that there's, 49 days from the time of death of one individual, till the, birth of the body or the landing of the soul into the next body.
Yeah, and the male and female, discovering your male or female at that 49-day point.
Yeah, the gonads differentiate in the human at 49 days too.
Yeah.
So that, kind of, led me to speculate about, the dynamic between sexuality and spirituality. The 49 days, might be, manifested through a flash of DMT through the pineal at that time. It may turn out to be the case. Especially, since they've discovered DMT in the living rodent pineal, that, adds another, brick, to the edifice of that, model, that speculation. Well, Judaism is interested in the number 7. 49 days elapsed from the beginning of the Exodus until the revelation on Mount Sinai. So that was 49 days.
Yeah.
Yeah. That festival is called Shavuot, which means 7 sevens. So it's a ubiquitous phenomena. 7 and 49. Seems to extend in a number of traditions. Yeah, and you can't help but think that those traditions are ultimately based on our bodies, on the biology.
True. Okay, cool. I was just wondering, if you had seen more of that as you, go through life, if you had noticed more number connections.
Yeah. Well, some.
Okay.
Yeah. You can go a bit crazy looking at numbers.
I know. Thank you.
I was curious what you think the effects of fluoride have on DMT and the pineal gland and how that corresponds within society in general within our natural basis of being able to function off of DMT within our brains and not by inhibiting it, by smoking it or injecting it, but more so by just a natural response of our inhibitions in acting in normal life. How does that affect also the way that DMT affects us when we do smoke it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the pineal fluoridation thing is pretty complicated, and I admit I'm just not that current on it. But it is the case that if you expose an animal to fluoride, it increases the calcification of the pineal. Yeah, but whether that correlates with reduced pineal function or not, I just don't know.
Okay.
I would imagine there are some data out there, but I haven't kept up with it. Like when you get older, your pineal calcifies more and more, and there is a reduction of production of melatonin as people get older, but that doesn't seem to correspond with the degree of calcification. So calcification is one thing, the decrease in melatonin production as you age is, something else. They're independent phenomena. The whole thing about if the calcified pineal is modifying natural production of DMT, I don't think, the pineal makes, DMT all the time. I think it may only make it at specific times. The lungs are where the majority of DMT is made routinely. So it may not have much of an effect, even if it has any, on everyday, consciousness. People have pineal tumors, cancer, cysts that need to be removed. They have strokes that destroy the pineal. They're rare, but it occurs. And those people seem relatively normal. They have more, difficulty when they travel across a lot of time zones, because of the melatonin, jet lag, sleep, light, connection. But whether or not they're more or less spiritual or dream more or less than people with a pineal, I don't know if it's been looked at or not.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, so kind of just touching on this whole concept, meme, mantra of New Age visionary community, which is the idea of science and spirituality coming together, and somehow that being a bridge to this promised land that we kind of talk about and vision. Anyway, I've really felt that there's still a big gap between those two, where there's a really intuitive, airy, ungrounded end, and then a reductive, kind of overly analytic end that seems to deteriorate the essence of what you're trying to look at scientifically. And so just curious kind of how you guide yourself when navigating the liminal space between intuitive fantasy and scientific reality, and bringing those together, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I kind of hate to get into that, but if people's eyes start to cross, let me know. Well, like once upon a time, before maybe Descartes, maybe before Spinoza, there was this field called metaphysics, and it described the physics of the invisible, which including mental states, like knowledge and perception. And so Aristotle back in the day divided the mind into the imaginative faculty and the rational faculty. Mm-hmm. And the imaginative faculty is the location in the mind where you perceive things and you feel things, you hear things, you smell things. You can remember perceptions once the object is gone, and you can then recombine them in novel ways. So compared or in contrast to what they call the imaginative faculty is what they call the rational faculty, and so that's where one experiences ideas, formless ideas, so the rational faculty is able, to do the same thing with abstract ideas as the imaginative faculty is capable of doing with, perceptions, sensations. So they talked about the balance of the two, like what you're talking about with the airy, fairy, intuitive, kind of bold strokes, not very rigorous, is mostly the purview of the imagination, without a balanced, rational, intellectual grounding. One of the models for the prophetic state is that there's some influence from above, which impinges on the rational faculty then spins over or then spills over, over to the imaginative faculty. The visions take place in the imaginative faculty, and the rational faculty then extracts, knowledge or wisdom or information. What are these visions representing? What are they trying to tell me? So that's the importance of combining the two. It isn't just that you feel and you perceive and you experience, but you have to think and be able to put words onto big notions that you can then apply to whatever it is that appears on the screen of the imaginative faculty.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And how do you personally navigate that when you're like working out how to project what you want to the world?
Well, I'm mostly going for the rational faculty bit right now because I think it's lacking in the psychedelic community.
Yeah, I see that too.
So that's my my current mission is to get people thinking about the psychedelic state more and more in a more discriminating manner.
Cool. Thank you so much.
We only have time for a few more questions, so I just want to make sure you all stay succinct so we can get them in. Go ahead, please.
Okay. As part of the Psychedelic Club at CU Boulder, I've talked to a number of people about psychedelics, both religious and non-religious. And out of the religious people, we get a lot more disagreement, a lot more like they aren't with the psychedelic movement from the Western religions. So first off, do you think that it started with Timothy O'Leary saying that psychedelics are more Eastern, or do you think that the Western religions started rejecting psychedelics first? And secondly, how do we reconcile these differences with the Western religions and psychedelic users?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, I think, because people say there isn't any role or there isn't any relation between psychedelics and spirituality, but when they are talking about spirituality, it's from the framework of an established religion. The Buddhists, so the Buddhists, do that. The Christians, the Muslims, the Jews do that. But I think it's important to define what you mean by religion. Like Spinoza liked to talk about the religion of the masses, which is based on hope and fear, and dogma, being told what to believe. It kind of it will inculcate obedience. That was the religion of the masses, and I would imagine most of the people who chafe at the idea of enhancing or speeding up the religious process are those kinds of religious people. That they've got a dogma, and anything that rattles it is quite suspect. But Spinoza also defined the religion of the elite, which is based in what he referred to as awe and reverence, knowledge and love of the divine, and that was a rare phenomenon. So I think if you find somebody with Spinoza's religion, which isn't dogmatic, it's to love and to know the divine. I think it's a pretty easy fit between the psychedelic state, if it's entered into with that intent, and what he would call true religion.
Okay, thanks.
We're going to go ahead and this will be our last
Well, yeah,
question.
so read Spinoza too. There's all kinds of great stuff out there that you can read from the psychedelic perspective. It kind of makes a lot of things make sense, even though you don't normally think about them in the same breath. And it's slow reading. Like one of the books that I read it's a Jewish tome called it is called The Guide of the Perplexed, by Maimonides. It was written in 1250. It took me a year to read that book. Taking notes and banging my head against it, I had to ask that rabbi, what did he mean by that? Yeah, but it's really worth it, because it's development of the rational, intellectual part of the mind, which can then be turned to the psychedelic state.
Hi, I'm Chanel Marcus of Seven Hailing Stars. The question I have is if you could elaborate a little bit about the research of DMT being produced in the lungs. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what was found to give us that answer?
Yeah. Well, the first, studies demonstrating, DMT in the body of the mammal, those were papers which described the presence of DMT in the rabbit lung. So they just, looked at the rabbit lung, they ground it up and looked for DMT, and there was DMT there. So then they looked at the enzymes which were responsible for, synthesizing DMT, which occurred in the lungs, and the precursors, the ingredients which are required, to be combined to make DMT, also occurred in the lungs. Then the research, field went kind of, fallow for a number of years. There were some papers that came out of, Michael Thompson's lab in Minnesota and in Houston, where he, revisited, looking at the, the genetic, mechanisms responsible for the enzyme, which makes DMT. It's called indole N-methyltransferase. So he was able to, locate, that gene in the lung, in human lung and in rabbit lung. And he, could isolate the gene, and he cloned it, and he multiplied it, and he put it into a virus, and then spread the virus over a petri dish with chicken cells, and it started to make the gene for DMT synthesis. But he didn't look for DMT in the mix, only the gene. But still, that's kind of a wild thought. If you could engineer the common cold virus to produce the enzyme that makes DMT, unleash that, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it.
Well, some molecular biologist out there ought to, go back to the lab and start working on that. But, don't say, who you got the idea from.
All right, thank you so much.
And with that, we're going to go ahead and end our question and answers. We have some brief updates before hopefully everybody moves over to our after party, and we can have some time to mingle and ask questions within the community. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Dr. Strassman.